Sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transporter beam. Now.
Warp 1, engage!
Hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck, the Discovery Edition. I am Michael Flores, the captain and host of this podcast, and in the science console, you're in the console, not next to it, but you're just a brain. You're
just a brain in a jar.
You're basically like the red sphere data. You're
Sweet.
just a consciousness. That's it.
So,
is David Sabal. Hello, David.
So I can have all these like droid versions of myself just running around the studio now?
Yep.
Actually, that would probably help you out.
Probably would. In fact, let's go and do that. All right. So, Dave, we are behind a bit. We probably shouldn't pretend we have been here the entire time. Unfortunately, Discovery this season ran right into our holiday break.
Yes.
Where the studio goes to dark from Christmas until February. But we decided to come back a little early so we can wrap up these episodes. So I apologize for being behind, but we will try to catch up quickly here and then go back to break.
Well, especially since this season of Discovery has been really stellar.
Well, I was very disappointed to leave. I was very disappointed to leave because, yeah, you're right. The season has been so strong that part of me was like, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't go to holiday break and at least stay here for the final season. But then I remembered I had a son and a family, and I had to weigh the priorities.
Although I will say I have watched the last episode that we covered, the episode 10.
Yeah.
I've watched that episode so many times, and I love it every single time. Especially in the very end when you get to the point, I am a guardian of forever. Dude, that's
great.
That is probably one of my favorite moments in all of Discovery right now.
It gives you nerd chills, right?
It gives you nerd chills.
Yeah. All right, Dave. So today we're going to be talking about episode 11 titled Su'Kal. It's directed by Norma Bailey and written by Ann Coffell Saunders. So it seems the crew of Discovery has discovered the source of the burn.
Yeah.
After taking a brief break from what I guess we can now officially call the main narrative to deal with the elements pertaining to Georgiou, we have returned to the issues of the burn and the dangers that the Emerald Chain present.
And I'm really surprised that basically they jump right into the whole let's get to the question of what caused the burn, because like,
were you surprised at how fast they got into that?
Yeah. Because like we're coming off of like a two-parter of dealing with sending off Georgiou in the mirror universe, and that beforehand they were alluding to the fact we found the source potentially, potentially the source, but then all of a sudden we get back to the main story arc, and suddenly we're just right there.
Yeah, we say fast, but I mean, realistically, we have 3 episodes left, so it's not necessarily fast, but I think because we did take that little break to deal with Georgiou from the main storyline, I mean, 10 episodes in at this point, 11 episodes in, and we took that little break, and it did kind of throw things off a bit because, as it turns out, Georgiou's story didn't really have much to do with what's happening this season in the way of the main myth arc. So it did screech. It brought everything to a screeching halt. So now we feel, I think as an audience, we may feel like it's a little jarring because, now we're right back to the main story. That being said, Dave, there were a lot of emotional highs as the threats to Discovery, or I should say the Discovery crew, keep ramping up. And side note here, is it just me or is everyone on board Discovery this season extremely emotional?
It seems it, doesn't it? I mean, at first I was willing to put it off as this crew is just coming off of the emotional high of what happened at the end of season 2 and coming into season 3, dealing with being thrust into the future like thousands of years. Everyone they know is long gone and all they got is each other. And me and you in the past episodes were alluding to the fact that they've been doing very well kind of showing that this crew is dealing with trauma still. It's dealing with trauma.
Right.
But now up to this point,
it just seems like professionalism just doesn't exist on Discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone cries. There's always a hug and a tear moment. And I'm going to be honest. It's a bit overdone this year. I mean, come on. Get a grip of your emotions and get to work. Have we ever seen... Jadzia died in Deep Space Nine. And the emotions were felt numerous episodes. All the way to the end of the final season, her death was felt. But they were in the midst of a war. Emotions were sidelined. They were dealt within the writing in a more subtle way. This is like everyone just cries every episode. And it's starting to feel like they're relying on those moments to create emotion, opposed to using actual writing to bring those elements out, to evoke those feelings. They're just simply having people cry.
Yeah, they're forcing the drama.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right. Sometimes it does, absolutely. But then there's times where it's just like, I roll my eyes. I'm like, Jesus, you guys are really fucking emotional. I get it. But you guys are also trained Starfleet officers. Grab a hold of your vaginas and balls and whatever else you might have if you're an alien or whatever else, and let's get to work. It's go time.
Well, especially...
I mean, can you imagine watching Voyager and every episode Janeway cried, or DS9, Cisco? I mean, fuck, Kirk. I mean, emotions were there in other Trek shows, right? But it was reserved for special moments.
Special moments.
It was more impactful that way when we saw Cisco get emotional, when we saw Janeway get emotional, when we saw Kirk get emotional when his son died. It was more impactful when you're a little careful, when you pull back from those tears and those sad moments. I just feel a little callous and numb to it at this point. I'm like, oh, look, Burnham's going to cry again for about 30 seconds here. Okay. Tilly's going to cry. All right. I mean, come on. Like, enough's enough. Let's get down to business.
No. And you have a very valid point, because like when it comes to writing, I always feel that if you keep forcing the drama onto your audience, you're gonna lose the impact.
It needs to be organic.
It needs to organically happen.
It just doesn't feel natural anymore.
And you have the risk sometimes in certain scenarios in other stories that I've read, when you force drama, it breaks that character's story.
David, it's just not as impactful. That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, when you overuse anything, it just doesn't feel the same. And when we do need to have that moment of sadness, it's not going to resonate as much because you've already used it so many different times. I just feel like there's a lot of delicate individuals that are not in control of their emotions. I mean, Jet Reno, Wasokan, and Colbert, they seem to be stable enough. Give them command. I mean, the three of them are badasses.
Especially Osokan, dude. Osokan this season has been fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm making jokes. I understand what they're doing here. We're also dealing with a series that is more serialized than any Trek before, so there's not a lot of room for emotional breaks, narratively speaking, due to the ongoing story. And if they were to pull back, some of the characterizations may come off a bit jarring. So I understand why they're doing it, because we're going boom, 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 boom. There's not a lot of time that has allowed us to slow down. The story has not slowed down. And because of that, we have these characters who are dealing with issues, and it wouldn't feel sincere if suddenly in the next episode, they're just fine. So I understand that. So there are some pros and cons that come with a 13 episode order and you're dealing with a serialized story. And this is part of it.
Yeah, because it's obvious that basically they have a lot that they want to cover. But the problem is kind of like if you try to throw way too much at the dartboard, only a couple of those things that they're going to want to do are going to hit. So I'm like you. The drama would have been better if they focused, say, on like just one or two of them. One or two of the drama that you want to focus on, make that into your story arc. But it just seems like every single character,
everyone has
to have that moment.
Yeah,
like that moment. Okay, this is your scene to cry.
And I'm tired of those encouraging smiles too. Like, like someone does something, oh, look at each other, they like do the little like grin and we're on your team.
Pat you on the back.
It's
condescending.
It feels just hokey
and condescending.
They need to pull back on some of that. They also need to pull back on the melodrama. Melodrama can tend to over sensationalize emotions in a way that sometimes detract or derail more complex, detailed characterizations. I mean, look at 7 of 9 in Voyager or Sisko towards the end of Deep Space Nine. When you have moments of melodrama, imagine, okay, let me say my piece here. Imagine if every time there was a moment, let me backtrack because I want to say this better. In a lot of ways, 7 of 9 was one of the best character studies on Trek. Okay? There was such a great analysis of who she is and who she had become during her run on Voyager. There was a lot of personal moments, a lot of nuance, a lot of subtext as well. They didn't always spell things out, but you understood. Now imagine if those moments were filled with melodrama. She cried. She was emotional. She always spilled her heart out to someone. It would have taken away from those intimate moments of character. Same thing with Sisko and Deep Space Nine. Same thing with Janeway and Voyager. They are not doing themselves a service they're doing themselves a disservice by continually bringing on the melodrama for our characters.
Yeah.
Let them deal with these problems quietly at times. Let them stew in it. Let them sit in it and let the audience interpret. Let the audience take some stuff away. But when you have them crying on each other's shoulders every episode, you actually do a disservice to your characterization.
Yeah, and for me, it's almost like as the audience, we get tired. We get desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Because by the end of it, it's almost like, okay, we get it. You're sad. Can you at least try to do something to remedy this situation?
David, it just doesn't leave room for real character development.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It actually distracts from it. All right, so we have a lot to get into when it comes to this episode, but first, live read time, Dave. Help us stay on the air through 2021 and beyond by subscribing to our Patreon tier. We offer a $3 a month tier, which gives you tons of bonus content and access to our pre-shows. We also have a $5 tier that grants you access to thousands of hours of additional From the Holodeck podcast discussions every single month. And if you're not really into those monthly fees, because we all have so many services now, Netflix, Hulu, CBS All Access, we do offer an annual way to purchase these memberships as well. I believe the $5 a month would cost you what? What's 5 times 10, Dave? Because we give you 2 months free when you purchase an entire year of our $5 a month. That's $50.
$50.
$50 gives you all the holodeck you can imagine shoved down your ear holes, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. As long as you consent. I'm not going to shove anything down your ear holes without consent.
We won't use conworms.
Yeah, not at all. I will not... Oh, wait, no, I won't say that because that's from I watched ahead. So
you watched ahead.
I was going to say something from another episode. All right, so Sakal is... Okay, so Sakal is an episode that falls into an area that typically and traditionally a difficult place to be when writing an episode for television. As, of course, this is the episode right before the penultimate episode.
Yes.
So typically, an episode struggles sometimes to bridge narrative elements and bring things together, usually in the way of reveals or partial reveals. By this point, the clues have been dropped, and we should know, generally speaking, where the season will most likely end. But typically, the episode right before that penultimate episode meanders a bit.
Yeah.
Almost all TV shows suffer from that because it's that moment where you're like, okay, we want to save the best for the penultimate episode for reasons of structure, right?
Yes.
So what are we going to do here? Well, let's put it's almost like they're putting a dam up. Like, well, we're not going to go past this. We can't let the water flow. Let's use the water as the narrative. Let's do a metaphor here, Dave. It'll be a terrible metaphor, but it'll work. They're putting that dam up to just stop the narrative from going over. And because of that, you're in still water.
Yes.
And you don't have a lot of room to move, and you find yourself doggy paddling to stay afloat. That happens with a lot of TV shows, and this episode did, without a doubt, have that aspect.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it wasn't the greatest episode. There were a lot of issues, a lot of stalling, a lot of weird elements. I mean, yes, the episode was beautiful, gorgeous. The dream character or the nightmare villain.
That was actually
fucking mind blowing.
That was cool.
Jesus, dude. I mean, the visual effects and the production design just blew me away in this episode. It was gorgeous.
Yeah,
the whole
just top notch.
Down the rabbit hole vibe was awesome. I loved it. But overall, in terms of narrative, it did struggle a bit, this episode.
And also, I kind of actually put that. Put one of the reasons is because not only is it having to be right in front of the penultimate episode, which we all know is like usually the strongest episode because they're leading into the big finale.
Usually everything is revealed in that episode.
Yeah. But it's also coming off of one of the best mid-season two-parters.
Yeah. I wouldn't say mid-season. Would you? No. I mean, what's half of 13, Dave?
Oh, no. You're right.
Come on. It's basic math.
Yeah,
it's arithmetic.
Well, still. It
Mathematics,
was like,
if you will.
You could say that that two-parter together was pretty much the best up to this point.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Then all of a sudden you're having this episode of Sukal follow that up, where we're already on a high. Are you going to even take us higher, or do we have to take a breath now?
Yeah.
And usually, an episode like that are used for the audience to take a breath.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Having the Georgiou episodes where they were does throw everything off a bit, and because of how it was structured, this episode does suffer because of that. There's moments that reaffirm things that were already known, that we were already privy to. The Emerald Chain kind of is just here at this point, and somehow ascertained the intricacies of the Discovery's spore drive to where they can latch on and jump with them.
Yeah,
there's some weird things that they don't really explain. And in the ways of Star Trek, one of the biggest things that we do not like as Star Trek fans is over-the-top, sensationalize science elements, I guess, is an easy way of saying it, that appear out of nowhere with no explanation, and they're used simply to move the plot forward.
Yeah. Basically, you're supposed to just suspend your disbelief
and listen,
accept the movie magic.
Listen, we get it. It's fiction and it's TV, but at the same time, when you have something as relevant to what's happening within the episode's narrative, like a device that can latch on to the Discovery, how did Asira and the Emerald Chain know that by latching on to to Discovery, they would be also taken away within the spore drive? How did they know this? Did we ever hear about this? Listen, I get it. They said that they scanned the vessel and figured things out, but come on. The spore drive is literally
unknown technology.
Unknown technology. That's the word I was looking for.
It's unknown.
Yeah.
It should be, and it should be classified technology, so no one would know just from simply scanning them. Like, oh yeah, this is mycelial technology. We could use it like this.
And I know they said they have scientists and whatever, but listen, Dave, I'm very fair with this show, but that moment, although amazing looking, was a bit frustrating as it didn't really bother to justify a scene like that. Yes, as I said, they said something about scanning their vessel, but when you're dealing with something like the spore jive, which in itself can be very dangerous and plot devicey, they should exercise caution.
Yes,
when dealing with moments like this.
And it's very jazz handy. Like,
Yeah.
it's jazz handy, where don't worry. Look, hey, it works just because we say it works. Normally, in other franchises, I could accept that. But when we're dealing with, especially like Star Trek, who is infamous for going into detail of like how things function in its universe,
Yeah.
you can't you can't do that. You can't try to con the audience, you know?
Yeah, and Dave, we can give a pass to the writers.
can.
I mean, they've been pretty strong this season.
They have.
Not pretty strong, very strong.
Yeah.
But as we always say, we got to be honest, and this episode definitely had a few red flags here and there that made me groan and roll my eyes a few times. And these are moments that we have not had all season. Not one moment has there been where I felt like, hey, listen, I'm going to roll my eyes because I'm annoyed right now. No, not at all. I've been 100% on board. So to feel so offended by this episode, is a little disconcerting, but hopefully things come together by the end.
Yeah.
I would say the strength of this episode, and correct me if I'm wrong or you disagree, the strength of this episode was 100% Tilly.
Yes.
You can always tell when writers favor certain characters over others, and whether they are aware of it or not, the writers definitely favor Tilly. She's consistently relevant. Her arc is always closely woven to the emotional subtext and theme. She is the most consistent character on the show.
Yes.
She never makes these weird, odd, poor decisions like Saru does by going to a planet and leaving an ensign in charge.
Yeah.
The writing is very concise with her. Her motivations are clear, concise, and they never meander. Her arc always pushes the immediate narrative forward. Where Burnham is used to keep the series together, you need characters like Tilly that can be used for specific episodes. And that's why it's very important for a Trek series to have a fully realized crew, which is something they have really worked towards or worked on this season, is fully realizing these characters so that they can have these moments like we're getting this season, specifically in the case with Tilly here. And we're definitely getting there. We still have some work to do with some of the crew. We have sidelined a few here and there, but for the most part, we are getting to know them as a group, at least.
And that's the important part, because you got to remember, this one of the biggest jokes was like from season 1 is we barely knew anyone in the crew. And then it didn't take till
barely. I don't think we knew any of them.
Well, no, you got a point. We didn't get their names till like season 2.
I mean, also to be fair, the first 2 episodes of the first season really didn't matter in the way of crew because we went to a whole different ship.
Yeah, that's true.
So 2 episodes into the first season, and we are introduced to a whole new crew that didn't die.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then like in here, at least in season 3 up to this point, we do have those moments where we actually do understand the crew. And I do agree with you. You are right. The strongest element in this episode is Tilly.
Yeah.
Because like we're getting to see her growth as a officer. That was her story arc. That's her story arc. Is basically starting from season 1 where she's talking about how she's nervous about taking the officer's test and having to take command, become like part of, go from ensign to first officer. That's been her story arc to the get-go. And now she's put front and center to see, okay, this is going to be your first time up in being an officer, she's going to have her pitfalls. She's not going to be perfect from the get-go. She's learning.
Yeah.
And it's organic. It feels organic in this episode.
Yes, and it works. Like, I don't have any problems with what they're doing. I do like the camaraderie between the crew. I know I was making jokes about them winking at each other and grinning all the time. It is a little silly at times, but overall I understand what they're trying to do with that. They're trying to build this tight-knit crew.
It's part of their personality.
Right. They're a very supportive group. It's very different than any Star Trek crew we've seen, and I understand they've been through a lot.
Oh yeah.
I want to say the closest comparison I would have in the way of other Trek shows is possibly Voyager. Voyager also had that because of the situation that the concept of the series put the crew in. The fact that they were, 70 years away from, right? It would take them 70 years to get home.
Get home.
So they were lost in space, essentially. So there are similarities with how the crew interacts with each other. But using Tilly in this episode, David, as they did, it let us see a perspective of command that we've not really seen before, from the eyes of the novice. And everything that comes with that, insecurities, fears, doubt, and having to deal directly with the Emerald Chain in a direct conflict was no easy task. And at the end, I'm sure Tilly will have learned something about herself. If that's the point of her failure, I do hope she's given the opportunity to rectify or resolve the situation herself. I hope by the end, when things are all said and done, that it's her that recovers command of the ship. Otherwise, you kind of scratch your head wondering, well, why the fuck did you put her through that then?
Yeah.
Is she going to learn something? Is there going to be consequences? So if those things turn out happening, then the decision to leave her in command and then lose command will in fact work in the way of characterization and development of her character.
And in a lot of ways, in her succeeding as a character, I'm hoping that when she bounces back, not only will it reaffirm our faith in Tilly as a character, but it'll reaffirm the faith of our captain in Saru. Because
our fake captain?
Saru is the one who put her there.
Yeah.
So with the fact that Saru made that decision to do it, then it basically shows that in a way Saru has faith in the crew behind him.
Yeah, that's great. He has faith in Listen, Dave, the Sakal stuff I struggled with as well. Almost all of it. I wouldn't say any of it was poorly written, but a lot of it just felt a bit strange and out of place. Number one, Dave, let's just tackle this. Okay. Number one, Saru needs to be a fucking captain. Okay?
Yeah.
I get the writers attempted to create a situation that would make sense for him to leave the ship, but I'm growing a bit tired of everyone being emotionally compromised. I get that we're dealing with an inexperienced command crew. Or a straight-up rebellious command crew, if we throw Burnham in there. But come on, the lives of the galaxy literally are in your hands, and everyone is off doing things that can be categorized as self-indulgent or borderline selfish.
Selfish, yeah.
Number two, Saru falling into a well of emotions because the child is Kelpian seems like a stretch. They are acting as if Saru hasn't seen a member of his species in decades, which isn't true.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah,
sure.
Because,
centuries of culture he's missed, but there will be a time for this later. It doesn't quite seem logical that a captain would allow himself to become so invested in something that is not within his control. Unless, Dave, the point is to show that no one on Discovery should be in command. Is that the point? Are they trying to show this inexperience? Because I'm all about character flaws. Believe me, anyone that listens to any of our discussions, I love character flaws. But those character flaws can't just be because that's how you're writing it and there's no payoff. Those character flaws have to create circumstances that the character then needs to deal with. There needs to be consequences.
Yes. Especially since, remember, earlier in the season...
And they need to learn from those consequences.
Yeah. Earlier in the season, that discussion between him and Vance obviously was important for the characterization of Saru, where he's basically telling him, this is what you have to do to be a captain.
I'm hoping
You have
this
to make the
leads
hard decisions.
honestly, Dave, I'm hoping this leads to them losing command. To be perfectly honest with you, if this is the direction they're going, then I can get on board that, because Vance questioned Saru's decision to put Tilly in charge.
Yep.
He has questioned Saru continually, and they continue to make poor decisions. So if I was Vance, I'd be like, guys, guess what's going to happen? New captain.
New captain.
And honestly, moving into season 4, I wouldn't doubt if we see that. Someone from the current time frame, someone who's Starfleet, obviously, takes command, and Saru goes to first officer position. Because, dude, they're not making decisions that would make them worthy to be in command. No one is.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, would you say anyone, any of the officers, who's the most capable of actually being the captain?
Can you imagine any of our characters, our past captains, making decisions that would put the fate of the galaxy on the scales? Okay, the fate of the galaxy is in your hands. You know the importance of your spore drive, and you leave because you need to see a Kelpian.
And it goes against one of the biggest rules of Star Trek, one of the biggest lessons that every Star Trek fan knows, which is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Not even Kirk, when his son died, compromised his crew.
Exactly. Why? Because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That has been a core tenet of Star Trek.
Riker left Picard for dead when he was assimilated for the crew. He didn't want to. He didn't like it. And he had another plan set in play to save him. But at that moment, it was, we need to leave.
We need to leave because he has to save everyone else.
Sisko willingly let many of his crew go off to war, and they would not rescue them if it meant leaving the station unprotected.
Exactly.
I don't know what the writers are doing. They're making our crew look bad. And again, if there's a point to it, these poor decisions are leading to consequences, then fine, I'm about that. But if we're having characters make poor decisions simply to create drama and move the plot forward, and we never tackle those issues, then that is something entirely different.
Exactly.
That, I'm afraid to say, is just simply poor writing.
Yeah. You hit it on the head.
So all these things are fine if it leads to something. If
it's
something. Just because you need to move that plot forward, then shame on you.
Yes. And honestly, these things, I feel like these elements should be in the penultimate episode, not here. Because just like what me and you discussed earlier, this is the episode before the penultimate episode.
Yeah.
So it seems like really jarring to all of a sudden be thrust right into this, and suddenly we have these issues come up unless you're going to lead us to something. Which, honestly, I'm willing to say, up to this point, the writing staff has not failed me.
Yeah, I agree.
They have not failed me, so I have complete faith that they will handle this well.
I'm bringing these things up, Dave, because they're red flags.
They're red flags.
But so far, as long as they handle these situations and there's consequences that come with these decisions, then I'm fine with it.
Yes.
So let's go to a quick break, and then when we get back, we'll jump into the rest of our discussion. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everyone, to Star Trek from the Holodeck. Be sure to find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. Just search Star Trek from the Holodeck. Share the show with your friends. Let us grow by helping us. Right, Dave?
Oh, absolutely. We need to grow more. We are the Borg.
Yeah. We assimilate our listeners. We go in through their ears. Is that what we do?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. All right, so apparently we are led to believe the burn was created by Su'Kal. The almost occurrence of a secondary burn revealed how this was a possibility. With the planet being made up of dilithium, and then you combine that with the childhood trauma, we get illusions that this led to the first disaster. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. Again, from a writing perspective, it's not terrible.
It's not terrible. That's how I felt. It wasn't terrible because it's at least something different.
But it's very anticlimactic, though. At least now. There's a lot we need to learn. We still have a lot to learn. We have 2 episodes to go, so I will reserve that judgment for later. But when you combine that with the Emerald Chain, and we have a season of threats that are kind of just ho-hum, there's an argument to be made that this season is far more grounded, which allows for a more intimate approach in a way of character development. But I'm just not quite sure. There's still 2 episodes left, as I said.
Yes.
Where we can explore these threats and the ramifications. So I will, as I said, reserve further judgment.
Yeah, because it seems very... I was really surprised that they come out of the gate and they explain it, the burn. That basically, I just thought... No, I was really surprised that they came out of the gate and basically just gave us that answer, because I'm really expecting something deeper. That I think there's more to the story here than what we see.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure there is.
Yeah, there has to be. And at first, I was like you. I was like, I'm not so sure about this. But I think I had to take a step back, because I kept thinking of what I wanted and what I wanted to see.
Yep.
And
you gotta pull out your wants. Wants cannot be a part of your review of a discussion, right?
Yeah, because
we always try to do that as Star Trek fans.
I found myself actually re-listening some of our older shows, and I found myself actually thinking about the fact that I said in the very beginning that the burn is going to be tied to something that we know from Star Trek lore. So I kept focusing in on that it has to be this big grandiose thing. It has to be this big grandiose thing. And then in this episode, it was something I never even thought they would ever go down.
Yeah, but we still don't quite know what it is, because we just know that he's connected to it
He's
somehow.
connected to it somehow.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not the stuff that I was originally pitching in the past episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to actually, as I said, they've got the credit, the writing credit right now to go
the clout.
Yeah. To go and do something different. Okay, you surprised me by doing a different route. Yeah. And at first, I stopped myself from hating the idea, because I told myself, no, wait. The writers, we know the writing staff's really good at this. They're going to go down a different path. That's fine. Just make it count.
Yeah.
That's all I ask. Make it count.
Yep. Yeah, Dave, as I said at the top of the show, the episode before the penultimate is typically a tough assignment.
It is.
I don't envy the writer that gets assigned these episodes, because it is difficult, without a doubt. So we'll see what happens. Gray returns, and no one really cares. I don't.
And that's the thing, is like
The great mystery was she wanted you to communicate, and I'm sorry. The great mystery was he wanted you. I apologize. I'm sucky with pronouns. The great mystery was he wanted you to communicate and befriend others. And Gray feels isolated and alone. You're dead.
You're dead.
Gray, you're dead. This isn't or shouldn't be, extra mundane either. This aspect with Gray has to be scientific. And if it is, he's dead.
And
presumably, this is some version of the rite of emergence that we had been introduced to in the DS9 episode titled, what was the name of the episode? With Ezri. It's one of the first episodes that were really focused on Ezri Dax in Deep Space Nine, where she had to find a murderer. So she had called forth the former host that was a murderer.
yes.
And she went through this rite of emergence. It's a ritual. And when she does that, she was able to call forth the former host's personalities and memories. They emerge and they become a tangible, not physical, but something that she can see. It's probably a better way of saying that. Something that she can see and that herself she can interact with, but no one else can see or hear the person. So I had assumed from the very beginning that that's simply what we were doing here.
Same here.
That we were dealing with some type of rite of emergence that went awry because of the way Gray died, or because of the complications that Adira was having, and possibly the rite of emergence had occurred without her needing to do anything.
Yes.
So that was what I was assuming. And if that's the case, let's not confuse the audiences, because you're not alive. You're dead. All that you're recalling, all that you're pulling forward is personalities and memories.
And now, if they're going to go down the route of explaining it and furthering the concept of that, I'm willing to be open-minded and say, hey, okay, let's see what you got. Are you telling me that there's more to this ritual than what we know?
Okay, so you're saying if there's a way that they can pull the personality and memory
out,
and actually bring them back to life,
because it's more than just a body. You're dealing with,
but you're not
a spiritual element at that point. And see there, that is where it gets dangerous.
Okay, that's awful,
and it's awful.
And I'll tell you why. Because then you're dealing. I mean, you're dealing with the philosophical,
exactly
what makes a person, and that's fine. But you can't really handle. How many episodes are left? 2?
2.
I don't see them being able to handle such a big thing in just 1 or 2 episodes. If that's what they're doing, then you need a lot more time, because what makes a person a person?
A person. Yeah.
Gray is dead.
By
his
far,
body is gone. His heart, his soul, essentially is gone.
And
all that stays when a host dies is their memories. That's it. They're not alive.
And that's what I think. Part of me is kind of interested in this, because are you going to tell me you're going to delve into how a trill truly functions and say the memories of the person can actually, quote unquote, manifest itself into a spirit of some kind? And at that point, you are trying to cross Star Trek into the metaphysical, which is really difficult.
Which we've been there before.
And it's the only time, and I was going to actually ask you, is the only time that something of a spiritual nature worked was in Deep Space Nine. If you think
because
about
it wasn't really spiritual. It was spiritual because of if you take into context the Bajoran faith. But they were essentially aliens. You're talking about the wormhole aliens, right?
The prophets.
Yeah, they were just aliens that a culture formed a religion around.
And see, that's where it gets a little dicey for me, because I'm willing to actually see if you're going to try to do something and broaden the history of the Trill species. Okay,
I'm okay with that too. I'm okay with that,
but you got to be careful when you're dealing with trying to bring metaphysical science and spiritualism into Star Trek, because it doesn't work. The closest thing we got is Deep Space Nine, where we had to deal with the prophets.
And they walked a tightrope.
And they
walked a tightrope.
It
was definitely a gray area, and they made it work because it was well thought out. So we'll see. I mean, I'm open to it. I have no problem with it. I'm all about fleshing out the world of Star Trek, but they got to be careful because you're dealing with, years and years of Trill lore.
Exactly.
And for them to rewrite lore and try to say that this person's alive or you can bring him back to life, how can you bring him back to life? It's just a memory.
Now, would you say that they're rewriting it or just broadening it even more?
Sure, they can broaden it. And I know there were already allusions to like a bit of an afterlife when they had gone into the waters on Trill.
Yes.
And how everything was connected, and it was spiritual because, again, in the context of their faith, yes, but it was also very cerebral and scientific. So as long as they explain it and it doesn't feel hokey, I think it should work. If that's the direction we're going, I'm assuming.
And that's where I think it will go, because like especially in the episode with when they dealt with the Trill species and everything else and introduced the character of Adria, that was a very metaphysical.
Who's Adria?
Or the character of, I keep saying her name wrong.
Adira?
Adira.
I knew what you were saying. I just want to be an asshole. Who's Adria?
I keep messing it up. But when they first introduced her, that episode was very metaphysical. And it didn't bother me.
You're talking about not the first episode, but when they went to Trill?
When they went to Trill.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That was amazing.
Great.
That was a great episode. But when you look back at it, that's how they actually did a metaphysical episode.
All right. Well, let's see, Dave. Let's see what they do. Right?
Yeah.
All right, Dave. So this does take us to our final thoughts. My RMD score is 78%. Wasn't the best episode of the season. In fact, it might have been the worst. And when I say worse, that sounds like a strong word because the episode wasn't bad. It was an episode filled with some poor decisions.
Yes.
And I'm not quite sure what's happening. If they go back and clarify some things and there are consequences to some of the writing choices, then, retrospectively, this episode will be a bit better. But there's just a few red flags here and there that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. I'm a big fan of what they're doing with Wilson Cruz's Culbert this season, having him be more of an independent character this season, separating him a bit from Stamets has really helped him grow. The idea of a man who was lost but didn't know he was lost, but then suddenly realizes he's got a purpose. That's a great story.
That's a fantastic story.
And I'm anxiously waiting to see how they further that. So there was some great moments. But stupid decisions is what paved the path for this episode, and I just can't get behind that ultimately when it comes to characters. Stupid decisions that our characters make.
Yes.
That just feels a little uncreative. Because you're trying to move the plot forward.
Yeah.
So 78%, Dave. What about you?
I actually went 75 with this episode.
Okay.
It is not my favorite episode of the whole season so far.
Yeah.
This is probably the worst episode of the season, but 75 isn't bad. Just like what you said. Mainly, what I actually kept writing in my notes is it's the creative decisions. I mean, like what you said, it's stupid decisions by our characters, but I take that further and say it's questionable creative decision by the writers. Is this what you're going to do? Okay, if you're going to go down this path, then you got to actually make the payoff worth it. And it's really questionable with only 2 episodes left. You have a lot on the plate already. And suddenly you're bringing all this melodrama up to the surface for all these characters to making them these questionable decisions. That's bad creative decisions. So that's why my score went down on this episode. compared to like where we last left off, because I believe me and you gave like the last episode a 98, 99, somewhere around there, and it just dropped to a 70. For you, like a 78, but for me, it dropped to a 75.
I kind of figured that this episode was going to have some problems because whenever you send me a message asking me if I watched it yet, it's usually because you had a problem with it and you're waiting to, shit all over it or tell me something that didn't work for you.
Well, I wanted to actually reaffirm that I'm not being crazy.
Yeah. Well, you weren't, Dave.
Yeah.
Listen. You can't have perfect.
Can't have perfect.
Can't have perfect. So please forgive us.
And you know what? This is the first episode that me and you both agree is not it's not the best. It's the worst.
Hey, we're honest and we hold the writers accountable. That's all. That's what we do. That's the part we play.
And I'm sure they're going to bounce back from it.
Yeah. Hopefully. All right, Dave, this does bring us to the end of our discussion. I want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure you visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/RainmanDigital, and pledge $3 or $5 a month. And when you do so, you gain additional content from Star Trek from the Holodeck, and you help us stay on the air. We really do need the help. As I say each and every episode, we are competing with some very big celebrity-driven podcasts out there. It used to be a little easier to get out there, but within the last 2-3 years, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, everyone's starting a podcast. All the celebrities are starting podcasts. And because of that, it's really clogging up the algorithms, and it's a little harder for us to be seen. And the best way we can keep doing these shows is by having our listeners that listen to us week in, week out, contribute a bit. So patreon.com/RainmanDigital. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.